Story 1. The Whiteout Passenger. Marcus Chen had been driving ice roads in the Northwest Territories for 12 winters. At 43, he considered himself a veteran who'd seen everything the frozen highways could throw at him. He'd navigated blizzards that reduced visibility to nothing, felt his rig slide on black ice at 70 kilometers per hour, and watched the aurora borealis dance across the sky during 18-hour hauls. But nothing in those 12 years prepared him for what happened on February 14th, 2019, along the Tibet to Contwoito Winter Road. The run should have been routine. Marcus was hauling mining equipment, drill bits and replacement parts from Yellowknife to the Akati Diamond Mine, a journey of about 400 kilometers across frozen lakes and tundra. He'd left at 4 in the morning, as was his custom, wanting to cover as much distance as possible during the coldest hours when the ice was most stable. The thermometer read -42 Celsius, cold enough that the moisture from his breath would freeze into crystals before it could fog his windshield. By 9 a.m., he was making good time, cruising at a steady 50 kilometers per hour across Lac de Gras. The ice road here was wide and well-maintained, marked with wooden stakes every 100 meters. His CB radio crackled occasionally with chatter from other drivers, but mostly he drove in silence, watching the endless white landscape slide past his windows. The sky was overcast, creating that peculiar effect where snow and sky became indistinguishable, a complete whiteout that could disorient even experienced drivers. That's when he first saw the figure. At first, Marcus thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by one of the marker stakes. But as he drew closer, he could make out distinct details. A person standing beside the road, wearing what looked like a dark parka, and waving both arms above their head. The universal signal for distress. Marcus's gut instinct was to keep driving. Out here, stopping for anyone was dangerous. The cold could kill in minutes, and there were stories, whispered among drivers at the fuel stops, about things that weren't quite right on the ice roads. But his conscience wouldn't let him pass someone who might genuinely need help. He eased off the accelerator and brought the rig to a stop about 20 meters past the figure. He grabbed his CB microphone. "This is northbound Unit 227 at approximately kilometer marker 180 on Lac de Gras. I've got a pedestrian flagging me down. Anyone else in the area?" Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting the frequency, but got nothing but white noise. Not unusual. There were dead zones all along the route where the radio simply wouldn't work. Marcus zipped his parka up to his chin, pulled on his insulated gloves, and climbed down from the cab. The cold hit him like a physical force, stealing the breath from his lungs. At -42, exposed skin could develop frostbite in less than 10 minutes. He turned to look back at the figure he'd passed, expecting to see them hurrying toward his truck. The roadside was empty. Marcus walked back along the ice, his boots crunching in the packed snow. He could see his own tire tracks clearly, twin lines stretching back across the white expanse. But there were no footprints beside the road, no sign that anyone had ever stood there. "Hello?" he called out, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. "Anyone there?" The wind was his only answer, a low moan across the frozen lake. Marcus felt the first trickle of unease run down his spine. He'd seen the figure clearly, a person in a dark coat, arms waving. He hadn't imagined it, had he? He was about to return to his truck when he noticed something odd. About 10 meters from the road, there was a disturbance in the snow. Not footprints exactly, but a depression, as if something heavy had rested there. Marcus approached cautiously, his breath forming clouds of ice crystals in the air. The depression was roughly human-sized, but instead of the crisp edges you'd expect from someone lying in the snow, it was smooth, almost melted. And in the center of it was something that made Marcus's blood run colder than the surrounding air. A trucker's logbook, the kind every commercial driver was required to keep. He picked it up with his gloved hands. The cover was frozen stiff, but he could make out the name written on the front: Robert Mackenzie. The date on the last entry was February 14th, 1989. Exactly 30 years ago to the day. Marcus knew that name. Every ice road driver did. Robert Mackenzie had disappeared on this exact stretch of road 3 decades earlier. His truck had been found abandoned on the ice, engine still running, but Mackenzie himself was never seen again. The official explanation was that he'd gotten disoriented in a whiteout and wandered off the road, but his body was never recovered. Marcus shoved the logbook into his pocket and hurried back to his truck, suddenly desperate to be moving again. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and checked his mirrors before pulling back onto the ice road. That's when he saw it again. The figure in the dark parka, now standing directly behind his trailer, both arms raised. His heart hammering, Marcus stepped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, and he watched in his mirrors as the figure receded into the distance. But something was wrong. The figure wasn't getting smaller. It was keeping pace with him, maintaining the exact same distance, arms still raised above its head. Marcus pushed the accelerator harder, bringing his speed up to 70 kilometers per hour, faster than was safe on the ice. The figure remained constant in his mirror, neither gaining nor falling back, as if it were tethered to his truck by an invisible rope. "This isn't real," Marcus said aloud, trying to convince himself. "This isn't happening." He drove for 20 minutes at that dangerous speed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes flicking constantly between the road ahead and the mirrors. The figure never wavered, never changed position. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. One moment it was there, arms raised, and the next his mirrors showed only empty road. Marcus forced himself to slow down, his hands shaking so badly he could barely control the wheel. His CB radio suddenly crackled to life, making him jump. "Unit 227, this is southbound Unit 419. You copy?" Marcus grabbed the microphone. "Copy, 419. Go ahead. Just wanted to check if you're okay, buddy. Saw you flying along back there like something was chasing you." I'm fine," Marcus managed. "Just trying to make up some time." "Well, slow it down. Ice is tricky today. We've already got one truck gone through up near marker 220. "Gone through? Jesus. Was the driver okay?" There was a pause, then, "No driver. Truck was empty. Engine running, door open, but no sign of anyone. 3rd time this month. It's like people are just vanishing out here." Marcus felt his stomach drop. What date was the first one?" "Let me think. February 14th, I believe. Why?" Marcus didn't answer. He set down the microphone and reached into his pocket for the logbook he'd found. As he opened it, something fell out. A photograph, old and faded. It showed a man standing beside a truck, smiling at the camera. Marcus recognized the location immediately. It was the exact spot where he'd stopped. But what made his blood turn to ice was the truck in the photograph. It was identical to his own, down to the company logo on the door. And behind the smiling man, barely visible in the background, was another figure. Dark parka, arms raised above its head. Marcus looked up at his mirrors. The road behind him was empty, but he could feel it. Something was in the truck with him. The temperature inside the cab had dropped noticeably, and his breath was now visible, even with the heater running full blast. He didn't stop driving until he reached the mine 18 hours later. When he climbed down from the cab, his fellow drivers said he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Marcus helped them unload his cargo, signed off on the delivery, and went to file his report with the dispatcher. But when he reached into his pocket for the logbook, it was gone. The photograph was gone too. The only thing that remained was a name and date, burned into his memory. Robert Mackenzie, February 14th, 1989. Marcus finished that contract, but he never drove the ice roads again. He moved south, took a job running regular highways, where the only thing you had to worry about was traffic and weather. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when he's driving alone, he catches a glimpse of something in his mirrors. A figure in a dark parka, arms raised, always the same distance behind him, waiting. And Marcus knows, he knows with absolute certainty, that one day he'll stop his truck to help someone in distress. And when he climbs back into his cab, his logbook will be lying on someone else's road, and his photograph will be tucked into someone else's pocket. Because the ice roads don't forget, and they always collect their debts. Story 2. The Convoy That Never Ended. Sarah Winters was relatively new to ice road trucking when she encountered the convoy. She'd spent 5 years driving long-haul routes across the lower 48 states before the allure of better pay and the challenge of northern driving brought her to Alaska in January 2021. At 31, she was one of the younger drivers on the Dalton Highway, the infamous stretch of road connecting Fairbanks to Deadhorse that truck drivers simply called the Haul Road. The Dalton was 414 miles of brutal terrain, much of it unpaved, running through some of the most remote and unforgiving landscape in North America. During winter, temperatures could drop to 60 below zero, and help could be hours or even days away if something went wrong. Sarah had studied maps, talked to veterans, and prepared herself mentally for the isolation and danger. She thought she was ready. Her third solo run north started on January 28th at 11 p.m. She was hauling drilling equipment for the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay, a full load that pushed her rig's weight limit. The night was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that made your engine block crack if you let it idle too long in one place without the Arctic-grade oil. The temperature gauge on her dashboard read -53 Fahrenheit. Sarah made good time through the first section, past Yukon River, and into the foothills of the Brooks Range. By 3 a.m., she was approaching the infamous Atigun Pass, the highest point on the Dalton, at 4,739 feet. This was where experienced drivers said prayers and rookies learned respect. The road here was a series of steep grades and tight corners, often covered in ice and swept by winds strong enough to flip a truck. As she began the ascent, her headlights caught something unexpected, tail lights ahead. Another truck, moving at roughly the same speed she was. Sarah felt a flutter of relief. Company on this stretch was always welcome, even if you never spoke to the other driver. Just knowing someone else was out here made the isolation less oppressive. She picked up her CB radio. "Hey there, northbound truck ahead. This is northbound unit with the Carlson Freight logo. Just wanted to say hi and let you know I'm behind you." Static answered her. Not unusual. The mountains could play hell with radio signals. Sarah settled in to follow the truck ahead, keeping a safe distance. As they climbed higher into the pass, she noticed something odd. The truck ahead never slowed down, never wavered. It maintained exactly 55 miles per hour, even around corners where Sarah herself had to drop to 35. She tried the radio again. "Northbound, truck. This is the Carlson unit behind you. You're moving pretty fast for this section. Everything okay up there?" Again, only static. Sarah frowned but kept following. Maybe the driver was experienced enough to take the pass at that speed. Maybe it was one of the local legends, the guys who'd been running this road for decades and knew every inch of it. Then she noticed the second truck. It appeared behind her, tail lights suddenly visible in her mirrors, as if it had materialized out of the darkness. Same make and model as the truck she was following, moving at the same unwavering speed. Sarah's unease deepened. "Southbound unit behind me," she called into the CB. "You trying to pass? I can slow down if you need." No response. The truck behind her maintained its distance, neither gaining nor falling back. And ahead, the first truck continued its impossible pace through the pass. Sarah's GPS showed she was near the summit. Any minute now, the road would start its descent toward the north slope. She'd been told the downhill side was even more treacherous than the climb, with runaway truck ramps placed at strategic points for drivers who lost their brakes. The truck ahead crested the summit and disappeared over the top. Sarah followed, and what she saw on the other side made her stomp on her brakes so hard her load shifted dangerously. The road ahead was filled with trucks. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all identical to the one she'd been following. They stretched down the mountain in a long line, tail lights glowing red in the darkness, all moving at exactly 55 miles per hour. Sarah's rig slid to a stop, her air brakes hissing. Behind her, the truck that had been following also stopped, maintaining the same distance. For a long moment, Sarah just sat there, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. All the trucks were identical. Same make, same model, same color. Even the license plates appeared the same from what she could see. And they were all moving in perfect synchronization, like a single organism rather than individual vehicles. Her CB radio suddenly exploded with sound, not static this time, but voices. Dozens of them, all talking at once, overlapping and echoing. "Can't stop, can't stop, can't stop. Following me, always following. How long have I been driving? Need to get to Dead Horse. Have to deliver. Have to deliver. Where is everyone? Where did they all go?" Sarah grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? What's going on?" The voices stopped abruptly. For 5 seconds, there was complete silence. Then a single voice came through, clear and calm. "Welcome to the convoy, Sarah." She dropped the microphone like it had burned her. How did they know her name? She looked at the trucks ahead, then checked her mirrors. The truck behind her was still there, and now she could see the driver through the windshield. It was a woman, but the distance and darkness made it impossible to make out features. Sarah's engine was still running. She could turn around, head back to Fairbanks, forget this run entirely. But as she considered this, the trucks ahead began to move again, all at once, as if responding to a signal she couldn't hear. And the truck behind her started moving too, closing the distance. She had no choice but to continue. Sarah put her rig in gear and rolled forward, falling into line with the convoy. As she did, her dashboard instruments began to behave strangely. Her speedometer locked at 55 miles per hour, even though her foot wasn't touching the accelerator. Her GPS flickered and died, then came back showing impossible information. Her position was simultaneously on the Dalton Highway and not on any road at all. The convoy descended the pass. Sarah tried to steer, tried to brake, but her truck seemed to be driving itself now, following the truck ahead with mechanical precision. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time itself felt wrong, stretched and compressed simultaneously. She passed landmarks she recognized, Galbraith Lake, Happy Valley, but they looked different somehow. Faded, less real. And the convoy never stopped, never slowed, just kept rolling north toward Dead Horse at exactly 55 miles per hour. Sarah's fuel gauge showed half a tank, but it never moved lower no matter how long she drove. Her clock read 4:17 a.m. and stayed there. She tried to count the trucks ahead of her, but kept losing track, the numbers slipping from her mind like water. The CB radio crackled again. Different voices this time, speaking one at a time. "I've been driving for 3 days," a man's voice said. "Can't remember stopping. Can't remember eating." 2 weeks for me," a woman said. "I don't get tired anymore. Don't get hungry. Just drive." "Has anyone made it to Dead Horse?" another voice asked. "I keep thinking we must be close, but we never arrive." "We're not going to Dead Horse," the calm voice from before said. "We're not going anywhere. We're just going." Sarah found her voice. "How do I get out? How do I stop?" Silence. Then, "No one stops. You follow the truck ahead. The truck behind follows you. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." "No," Sarah said firmly. She gripped the steering wheel, trying to force it to turn. "No, I'm not staying here." She yanked the wheel hard to the right, fighting the truck's resistance. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, her rig lurched off the road and into the snow. Sarah's seatbelt locked as the truck tilted, threatening to roll. She cut the engine completely and sat in sudden, shocking silence. The convoy kept moving. Truck after truck passed her position, none of them slowing, none of them acknowledging that one of their number had broken free. Sarah counted them as they went by. 10, 20, 50, 100. The line seemed endless. Finally, after what might have been hours, the last truck passed. Sarah watched it disappear into the darkness, and then she was alone. She tried to restart her engine. Nothing. Tried again. The starter turned but wouldn't catch. The temperature in the cab was already dropping. Without heat, she'd freeze to death in this cold within hours, maybe less. Sarah grabbed her emergency beacon and satellite phone. The phone's screen was cracked. She didn't remember that happening, but it powered on. She dialed the emergency number she'd been given when she signed her contract. The dispatcher who answered sounded confused. "Carlson Freight? Sarah Winters? Ma'am, we don't have any driver by that name. And Carlson Freight went out of business in 1987. "No, that's wrong," Sarah insisted. "I just left Fairbanks yesterday. I'm stuck on the Dalton Highway near Galbraith Lake. I need help." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said, and she could hear typing in the background. Then, "Ma'am, there's no truck registered to that company anywhere in our system, but we're showing... This is strange. We're showing multiple GPS signals at your location. Dozens of them, all Carlson Freight trucks. How is that possible?" Sarah looked at the empty road ahead, then back the way she'd come. In the distance, she could see lights. Headlights. A new convoy was coming, moving south this time. Moving toward her. "Send help," she whispered. "Please, send help now." The phone went dead. Sarah sat in her frozen cab and watched the approaching lights. She understood now. The convoy ran both directions, north and south. Always moving, always adding to its numbers, and she'd almost become part of it. Rescue crews found her truck 3 days later, empty and unlocked. Sarah Winters was discovered 18 miles from her rig, suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite, walking south along the highway. She kept saying she'd been following the lights, trying to get home. She recovered physically, but she never drove again. And she never could explain how she survived 3 days in -50-degree weather with no shelter. Or why her truck's odometer showed an additional 2,400 miles, roughly 6 round trips between Fairbanks and Dead Horse, even though it was found almost exactly where she'd gone off the road. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah wakes up convinced she can hear CB radio chatter, voices calling to each other across the darkness, and one voice, calm and patient, repeating the same message. "We'll be waiting. The convoy never ends." Story 3. The Frozen Broadcast. James Holloway had been a telecommunications technician before he became an ice road driver. The transition made sense to him. Both jobs involved long hours of isolation, technical problem solving, and working in conditions most people would consider miserable. In December 2020, at age 38, he accepted a specialized contract that combined both skill sets, delivering communications equipment to remote weather stations along the Dempster Highway in Canada's Yukon Territory. The Dempster was one of the few ice roads open year-round, though winter travel required special permits and equipment. It ran for 740 kilometers from the Klondike Highway Junction all the way to Inuvik in the Northwest Territories, much of it above the Arctic Circle. James's route included scheduled stops at 4 automated weather stations that required equipment upgrades before the spring monitoring season. He departed Dawson City on December 19th, driving a modified rig equipped with specialized shock absorbers and heating systems. His cargo included sensitive meteorological instruments, satellite communications gear, and replacement servers for the remote monitoring stations. The forecast called for clear conditions, and James felt confident despite this being his first solo run on the Dempster. The first 2 stations went smoothly. At each stop, James would power up the station's equipment, install the new components, run diagnostics, and move on. The work was familiar and satisfying, and the complete isolation, no cell service, no internet, just him and the endless snowy landscape, felt peaceful rather than threatening. The third station, designated WS-317, was different from the start. James reached it around 8 p.m. on December 21st, the winter solstice. The sun had set hours earlier and wouldn't rise again for several weeks. This far north, winter meant months of perpetual darkness. He parked his rig beside the station's generator shed and grabbed his toolbox and the equipment manifest. WS-317 sat on a slight rise overlooking a frozen river valley. Like the others, it was an automated facility, just a cluster of meteorological sensors surrounding a small heated shed that housed the communications and computing equipment. No human staff, no permanent structures beyond the utilitarian monitoring equipment. James had been told the station had been operating without incident for 15 years. But when he opened the shed door, he knew immediately that something was wrong. The equipment was running, which should have been impossible. According to his manifest, WS-317 had been offline for 6 weeks due to a power system failure. That was the whole reason for his visit, to replace the failed components and restore functionality. Yet all the displays were lit, all the indicators showed normal operation, and the heating system was working perfectly. James set down his toolbox and examined the power system. The equipment that was supposed to have failed looked brand new, not just functional, but pristine, as if it had been installed yesterday. He checked the serial numbers against his manifest. They didn't match. In fact, the serial numbers indicated equipment that wouldn't be manufactured for another 3 years. He pulled out his satellite phone to call his dispatcher, then remembered no satellites were overhead at this time of night. He'd have to wait until morning for a clear signal. James decided to run his standard diagnostics anyway, figuring he could at least document the situation for his report. That's when he heard the broadcast. It was coming from the station's radio equipment, a voice transmission on a frequency that should have been silent. James put on the headphones and listened. December 21st, 2023. US 317 operational. Temperature minus 38 Celsius. Wind northwest at 25 knots. Barometric pressure falling. Equipment status nominal. Technician arrival confirmed. James's blood went cold. Today was December 21st, 2020, not 2023. The voice continued, calm and mechanical, like an automated system reading from a script. But there was something wrong with it. Something not quite human about the cadence and pronunciation. Technician James Holloway, age 41, arrived at 2017 local time. Cargo inspection reveals discrepancies. Equipment does not match manifest. Equipment is from incorrect year. Paradox detected. Resolution required. James yanked off the headphones. He was 38, not 41. And how did the broadcast know his name? This had to be some kind of recording. Maybe a prank left by the previous technician. But that didn't explain the equipment or the date or the specific details about his arrival time. He stepped outside the shed, suddenly needing fresh air despite the brutal cold. His breath formed clouds of ice crystals that glittered in the glow from his truck's running lights. The night was absolutely silent, except for the generator's steady hum. Then the broadcast started again, but this time it was coming from his truck's CB radio. James could hear it clearly even from 15 meters away. Technician displays signs of distress, elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, confusion regarding temporal discrepancies. This is expected. This is normal. This has happened before. James ran to his truck and grabbed the CB microphone. "Who is this? How are you broadcasting on this frequency?" The voice didn't acknowledge his question. December 21st, 2020. Technician James Holloway experiences station WS 317 for the first time. December 21st, 2021. Technician experiences station for the second time. December 21st, 2022. Third time. December 21st, 2023. Fourth time. The loop continues. The loop has always continued. "That's insane," James said. "I've never been here before. This is my first run on the Dempster." Incorrect. Memory inconsistencies are part of the loop structure. Each iteration, the technician believes it is the first time. Each iteration, the technician installs equipment from the future. Each iteration, the technician becomes part of the station. James's hands were shaking. This wasn't possible. It wasn't real. He was going to get back in his truck, drive away from this place, and report a major equipment malfunction. Someone else could deal with WS 317. But as he reached for the door handle, he saw something that made him stop. There were footprints in the snow leading from his truck to the station shed. His own footprints from when he'd first arrived. Except they weren't just leading to the shed. They were leading from it as well, as if he'd made the journey multiple times. And the snow around the station was disturbed in other ways. Patches where something heavy had rested. Patterns that might have been tire tracks, though they were partially drifted over. How long would it take for snow to drift like that? Days? Weeks? The broadcast continued, relentless. The technician will attempt to leave. The technician always attempts to leave. But the equipment must be installed. The timeline must be preserved. The loop must continue. James climbed into his truck and started the engine. He didn't care about the contract, the delivery, or anything else. He just needed to get away from WS 317. But when he tried to shift into reverse, The transmission wouldn't engage. He tried forward gear. Nothing. The engine was running perfectly, but the truck simply wouldn't move. Desperate now, James grabbed his emergency pack and climbed back down. He'd walk if he had to. The last station was about 40 kilometers back. If he pushed hard, he could make it in 12 hours. It would be brutal, and he'd risk frostbite, but anything was better than staying here. He'd walked maybe 200 meters when he realized he could still hear the broadcast. Not from his truck's radio. That was too far away now. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, as if the air itself were carrying the transmission. Distance from station, 212 meters. Temperature, minus 39 Celsius. Estimated survival time at current rate, 7 hours. Estimated time to station, WS 316, 14 hours. Probability of survival, 0.03%. The numbers changed as James walked. 300 meters, 400. And with each update, the probability of survival decreased. The voice wasn't threatening him. It was simply stating facts, calculating odds, tracking his progress toward inevitable hypothermia. At 800 meters, James stopped. His face was already numb despite his insulated mask, and his feet felt like blocks of ice in his boots. The wind had picked up, driving snow into his eyes. He couldn't see his truck anymore, couldn't see the station, couldn't see anything but white darkness. The broadcast voice said, "Decision point reached. Continue and die, or return and comply. The choice has been made before. The choice will be made again." James turned around and walked back to the station. He told himself he was just going to warm up, to think things through rationally. But he knew that was a lie. Deep down, he knew he was going to install the equipment. He was going to complete the delivery, just like the broadcast said he would. Back in the station shed, James worked methodically. He installed the future-dated equipment, connected the systems, and ran the diagnostic protocols. Everything functioned perfectly. As he worked, the broadcast provided commentary. December 21st, 2020. Installation complete. Equipment now operational, 3 years ahead of schedule. Causality loop established. Technician has fulfilled purpose. James finished the installation at 11:47 p.m. He documented everything in his log, including the serial number discrepancies and the date anomalies. Then he locked up the shed, climbed back into his truck, which now started and shifted normally, and drove away from WS 317. He completed the 4th station installation without incident and returned to Dawson City on schedule. His report about the WS 317 anomalies was filed, and he assumed investigated. But James never heard back from his dispatcher about it. It was as if his concerns had simply been ignored. 3 years later, in December 2023, James received another contract for the Dempster Highway weather stations. He was 41 now, still driving ice roads, still taking the specialized telecommunications jobs that paid better than standard hauling. The route included 4 stations. The third one was designated WS 317. James arrived at 2017 local time, just as the sun was setting. When he opened the equipment shed, he found everything exactly as it should be. Power system failed, equipment offline, heating system cold. He checked his manifest against the serial numbers of the replacement equipment in his truck. They matched perfectly. The equipment he was supposed to install was dated 2023. As he began working, he noticed something in the corner of the shed. A logbook, old and weathered. He opened it and saw his own handwriting from 3 years ago, describing impossible events and temporal anomalies. He had no memory of writing it. The station radio crackled to life, and James heard his own voice, younger and frightened, saying, "Who is this? How are you broadcasting on this frequency?" And from his own mouth, without conscious thought, James heard himself respond. December 21st, 2020. Technician James Holloway experiences station WS317 for the first time. He works the ice roads still, running the same route every year. Each December 21st, he arrives at WS317 at exactly 2017. Each time, he installs the equipment. Each time, he speaks to his younger self through the broadcast, explaining what has happened, what is happening, what will happen. And each time, his younger self doesn't understand, won't understand, can't understand, until 3 years pass, and he returns to WS317 to complete the loop from the other side. The station operates flawlessly now, collecting data, transmitting reports, serving its purpose. And James Holloway serves his purpose too, caught in a moment that repeats eternally. A technician forever installing equipment from a future that has already happened, speaking to a past that is yet to come. The ice roads don't just connect places. Sometimes they connect times. Story 4. The Last Truck Stop. Denise Kovac discovered the truck stop on her 6th run along the R504 Kolyma Highway in far eastern Siberia. At 45, she was one of the few women driving Russia's ice roads, and certainly the only Canadian doing so. She'd taken the job in November 2018 for the challenge and the stories she'd be able to tell. The Kolyma Highway was legendary, known as the Road of Bones, because prisoners who died during its construction were buried beneath the permafrost. Their remains, quite literally, part of the road's foundation. The highway ran over 2,000 kilometers, from Magadan to Yakutsk, most of it unpaved, all of it treacherous. Denise was hauling food supplies to remote villages and mining camps, running the route every 2 weeks during winter, when the road was passable. She'd learned enough Russian to communicate basic needs, and her GPS was loaded with detailed maps marking fuel stops, emergency shelters, and safe parking areas, which is why she was so confused when she saw the truck stop that shouldn't exist. It was 3 a.m. on February 8th, 2019, and Denise had been driving for 19 hours straight. The temperature outside was minus 52 Celsius, cold enough that diesel fuel could gel in her tanks if she stopped moving. She was approximately 380 kilometers from Yakutsk, in a section of highway she'd driven 6 times before. There was nothing out here but snow, permafrost, and occasional stands of stunted larch trees. But suddenly, there were lights. A building complex appeared on the right side of the road. A proper truck stop with fuel pumps, a main building with lit windows, and a parking area where 3 other trucks sat idle. Denise's fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank, enough to reach Yakutsk easily. But the sight of civilization in this desolate stretch was irresistible. She could warm up, get coffee, maybe eat something that wasn't an energy bar from her cab. She pulled into the parking area and sat for a moment, studying the facility. It looked old, but well-maintained, the kind of Soviet-era construction that was built to last but rarely upgraded aesthetically. The sign above the main building read, Stanция Koster, in Cyrillic, Station Kostyor, or Station Bonfire. Denise didn't remember seeing it marked on her maps, but that wasn't unusual. New truck stops opened periodically, and GPS databases were always months behind reality. The other 3 trucks in the lot were covered with snow, as if they'd been parked for days. That seemed odd. No driver would leave their rig unattended for that long in this cold. The engines would freeze solid, becoming unrecoverable lumps of metal, unless the drivers were inside, waiting out weather. Denise climbed down from her cab and immediately felt the cold trying to kill her. She hurried toward the main building, her boots crunching in snow that hadn't been plowed recently. The front door opened easily, releasing a wave of warm air that felt like a gift from heaven. Inside, the truck stop was surprisingly spacious. There was a counter with a cash register, shelves stocked with basic supplies, several tables and chairs, and a food service area where a coffee pot sat on a warming plate. But there was no one behind the counter, no customers at the tables, no sounds except the hum of fluorescent lights and the tick of a clock on the wall. "Hello?" Denise called out in Russian. "Anyone here?" No answer. She walked to the counter and rang the bell sitting beside the register. The sound echoed in the empty space, but no one came to assist her. Denise frowned. Maybe the attendant was in the bathroom or in a back room taking inventory. She helped herself to coffee, leaving money on the counter. The coffee was fresh and hot, which meant someone had to be around. She sat at one of the tables and pulled out her phone, thinking she'd wait a few minutes for the attendant to return. But her phone showed no signal, which was normal for this area, and the time display was behaving strangely. The numbers kept flickering. 3:14 a.m., then 3:09 a.m., then 3:21 a.m., never settling on a consistent time. That's when Denise noticed the photographs on the walls. They showed the truck stop through different eras, black and white images from what looked like the 1960s or 70s, color photos from the 80s and 90s, more recent digital prints. In every photo there were people, drivers, attendants, mechanics. Everyone was smiling, as if Station Bonfire had been a welcome oasis in the brutal landscape. But in one of the photos, Denise saw something that made her breath catch. It was a recent picture, judging by the clarity and the modern trucks in the frame. And one of those trucks was hers. Same company logo, same model, same license plate number. She was even visible in the photograph, standing beside the truck with a coffee cup in her hand, looking directly at the camera. Denise didn't remember anyone taking that photograph. In fact, she was certain no one had taken it, because she'd never been to this place before tonight. She stood up quickly, her coffee cup clattering on the table. Okay, this is wrong. This is very wrong. The clock on the wall had stopped ticking. The hands pointed to 3:33 a.m., and as Denise watched, they began moving backwards. The fluorescent lights flickered, and for just a moment, the truck stop looked different. Older, more worn, with fewer modern touches. Denise headed for the door. She needed to get out of this place, get back in her truck, and put as many kilometers as possible between herself and Station Bonfire. But when she grabbed the door handle, it wouldn't turn. Locked from the inside, which made no sense. Behind her, she heard a sound. Not footsteps or voices, but something else. A soft hissing, like wind through a narrow gap. Denise turned and saw that the coffee pot had started boiling, steam rising in thick clouds. The lights flickered again, and now the truck stop looked even older. The floor tiles were cracked, the paint on the walls was peeling, and some of the shelves were empty. "Let me out," Denise said, pulling harder on the door handle. Come on, come on." The hissing sound grew louder. It was coming from everywhere now, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. And with it came voices, faint and distant, speaking in Russian too rapid for Denise to follow. She caught fragments. "Stuck here. Never left. The road won't let go." Denise grabbed a chair and swung it at the door's window. The glass should have shattered, but it didn't even crack. She hit it again and again, putting all her strength behind each blow. But the window remained intact. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Denise could see shapes moving. Human forms, or something approximating human forms, drifting between the tables and shelves. They were the people from the photographs, she realized. Drivers who had stopped at Station Bonfire, and never left. One of the shapes approached her, and in the dim light from outside, Denise could make out features. An old man wearing a Soviet-era driver's uniform. He pointed toward the back of the truck stop, toward a door Denise hadn't noticed before. "There," he said in accented Russian. "The way out is always through the back." Denise didn't trust this, didn't trust anything about this situation, but staying in the main room seemed worse. She moved toward the back door, the shapes parting to let her pass. The old man followed, along with several others, a woman in 1980s clothing, a younger man with a modern jacket, a teenager who looked no older than 17. The back door opened easily, and Denise found herself in a narrow hallway. The walls here were rough concrete, and the floor was uneven, as if the building had been constructed in sections over many years. The corridor led to another door, which opened into what looked like a garage or maintenance area. 3 trucks sat in the garage. Not modern trucks, these were older models from different decades, and they were in various states of decay. One had flat tires and a rusted frame. Another had its windows smashed and engine parts scattered on the floor. The third looked intact, but ancient, a model Denise recognized from history books as being from the 1970s. "We tried to leave," the old man said. "All of us tried. But the road doesn't let go. Station Bonfire is where we stopped, so Station Bonfire is where we stay." "That's insane," Denise said. "I'm leaving. I'm getting in my truck and driving away." "Your truck is already here," the woman said, pointing. Denise looked where she indicated and felt her stomach drop. In the corner of the garage, partially hidden by shadows, was a 4th truck. Modern. Same make and model as hers. Same company logo. But it was in the same state of decay as the others. Tires flat, metal corroding, windows clouded, with frost. "No," Denise whispered. "That's not mine. Mine is parked outside." "Look at the license plate," the younger man said gently. Denise didn't want to look, but her feet carried her forward anyway. She approached the decaying truck, her heart hammering, and read the license plate number. It matched. This was her truck. Or it would be her truck. Or it had always been her truck. "Time doesn't work right here," the teenager explained. He spoke with a Yakut accent, marking him as a local. "Station Bonfire exists in many times at once. When you stopped here, you stopped in all the times simultaneously. The version of you walking outside, getting coffee, driving away, that already happened. But it also hasn't happened yet. And this version, the one who sees the truth, this is also happening." "How do I fix this?" Denise demanded. "How do I leave?" The old man smiled sadly. "You already did. You're already driving toward Yakutsk, wondering why you feel so tired, why you can't remember the last hour clearly. In that version, you'll make your delivery, complete your contract, and never drive the R504 again, because something about this trip will bother you forever. But this version," the woman continued, "this version stays. Because Station Bonfire needs witnesses. It needs people who understand what happened to all of us. The drivers who stopped and never left. The ones who are buried in the road itself, and in the walls, and in the foundation." Denise looked at the decaying trucks, at the ghostly figures surrounding her, at her own future self, rotting away in the corner of an impossible garage. She thought about causality, about multiple timelines, about the nature of places that exist outside normal space and time. "I don't accept this," she said firmly. "I choose the timeline where I leave." The old man nodded. "That's what we all said. That's what we all chose. But wanting something doesn't make it real." Denise closed her eyes. She focused on the feeling of her truck beneath her, the vibration of the engine, the cold of the steering wheel, the weight of her coffee cup. She focused on the version of herself that was already driving away, that had never seen the garage or the ghosts or the truth. When she opened her eyes, she was in her truck. The parking lot was empty, no other vehicles, no main building, no lights. Just an empty section of shoulder on the R504, unremarkable and forgotten. Her coffee cup sat in the holder beside her, still warm. Her GPS showed she'd lost exactly 1 hour. Denise drove straight to Yakutsk without stopping again. She made her delivery, collected her payment, and immediately quit her contract. When they asked why, she said only that she didn't like the R504 and wanted different routes. They thought she was being difficult, but they let her go. She never drove the road of bones again. She took contracts on other ice roads, Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, but never Russia. And she never told anyone about Station Bonfire, about the ghosts, or about the version of herself slowly decaying in an impossible garage. But sometimes, late at night, Denise wakes up convinced she's still there, that the version of herself driving away was the ghost, the echo, the dream. That the real Denise Kovacs stopped at Station Bonfire on February 8th, 2019, and never left. She tells herself that's crazy, that she's here, alive, warm, safe. But deep down, in the part of her that saw the truth, she knows that time and space don't work the way they should on the ice roads. And once you stop at Station Bonfire, some part of you never leaves. The photographs on the walls show all the drivers who thought they escaped. And in the most recent picture, there's a woman with a coffee cup, looking at the camera with confused eyes, not yet understanding that she's already stayed forever. Story 5. The Ice Speaks. Thomas Brennan heard about the singing ice from other drivers before he experienced it himself. They called it the lake voice, a phenomenon supposedly unique to certain sections of the Mackenzie River Ice Road in the Northwest Territories of Canada. According to the stories, the ice would sometimes produce sounds, hums, groans, and occasionally something that sounded almost like words. Most drivers dismissed it as thermal expansion, creating audible stress fractures. Nothing supernatural, or even particularly unusual. Thomas was skeptical. At 51, he'd spent more than half his life driving trucks in winter conditions, and he'd heard ice make every sound imaginable. Creaks, pops, booms that sounded like gunshots, all normal acoustic phenomena. The idea that ice could sing or speak struck him as the kind of superstitious nonsense that got passed around by rookies and bored veterans looking for something to talk about during long hauls. His perspective changed on March 3, 2022, during a night run from Fort Providence to Wrigley along the ice road section of Highway 1. The run should have been straightforward. Thomas was hauling construction materials, lumber, bags of concrete, roofing supplies, for a building project at one of the remote communities. The ice road had been open for 3 months and was rated safe for heavy vehicles. The weather was clear, with temperatures holding steady at -35°C, cold enough to keep the ice stable, but not so cold that equipment would fail. Thomas left Fort Providence at 7 p.m., timing his departure to avoid the slight softening that occurred during the daylight hours, even in deep winter. The first hour passed without incident. The ice road here followed the Mackenzie River, running along the frozen surface with banks visible on either side. Other than his headlights and the stars overhead, there was no light anywhere, just absolute darkness pressing in from all sides. Around 8:30 p.m., Thomas became aware of a sound. At first, he thought it was his radio picking up interference. a low-frequency hum that made the speakers vibrate. He switched off the radio, but the sound continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, from the ice beneath his wheels, from the air around his truck, from inside his own head. The hum gradually resolved into a tone, musical and sustained, like someone running a finger around the rim of a crystal glass. Thomas had read that ice could produce harmonic resonances under certain conditions, so he wasn't immediately concerned. It was actually kind of beautiful, in an eerie way. Then the tone split into multiple notes, creating a chord, and the chord began to change, rising and falling in a pattern that was unmistakably melodic. The ice was singing. Thomas slowed his truck to a stop, less out of fear and more from a sense of wonder. He rolled down his window despite the cold, wanting to hear the phenomenon more clearly. The melody was complex, shifting through what sounded like different musical scales. It reminded him of throat singing he'd heard from Inuit performers, multiple tones produced simultaneously, deeply resonant and otherworldly. He pulled out his phone to record the sound, thinking his fellow drivers would never believe this without proof. But as soon as he started recording, the melody changed. It became more structured, more deliberate, and Thomas could swear he heard rhythm in it, like words being formed from pure sound. The recording on his phone played back as static, complete white noise, no melody at all. Thomas tried again with the same result. The singing was audible to his ears, but refused to be captured electronically. "Okay," Thomas said aloud, his breath forming clouds of ice crystals. "This is officially weird." The melody responded to his voice. The tones shifted, becoming higher-pitched, more urgent. And for just a moment, Thomas could have sworn he heard actual words mixed in with the music. "Listen. Remember. Witness." Thomas put his truck in gear and started driving again, faster now. The melody followed him, keeping pace with his speed, always present just below the threshold of his conscious hearing. And as he drove, the sound began to change the way he perceived his surroundings. The darkness seemed less absolute. Thomas could make out details that should have been invisible. The texture of the ice surface, the individual snow crystals in the drifts along the roadside. Even the stars overhead appeared sharper and more numerous. It was as if the singing was somehow enhancing his senses, allowing him to see and hear things that normally existed beyond human perception. He passed a marker stake indicating he was approximately 50 kilometers from Fort Providence. Thomas knew this stretch of road. There was nothing notable about it, just a straight section of ice road running down the center of the frozen river. But now, with his enhanced perception, he could see something wrong with the ice ahead. There were shapes beneath the surface, not fish or debris, but something else. Forms that looked almost human, suspended in the ice like flies in amber. Thomas's rational mind insisted they had to be natural formations, tricks of light and shadow, but his eyes told him otherwise. They were bodies, dozens of them, frozen in the river ice, perfectly preserved. The singing grew louder, more insistent. Thomas tried to look away from the shapes, to focus on the road ahead, but his eyes kept being drawn back to them. And the more he looked, the more details he could see. Some of the bodies wore modern clothing, parkas, jeans, work boots. Others wore older garments, fur clothing, leather, styles from decades or even centuries past. Thomas's truck passed directly over one of the shapes, and for just an instant, he thought he saw its eyes open. He slammed on his brakes, his rig sliding to a stop. He sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart hammering in his chest, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by absolute silence. Even the wind had died. Thomas sat in that unnatural quiet, his truck idling, his breath the only sound. Then, with a crack like thunder, the ice spoke. Not music this time. Actual words formed from the groaning and cracking of the frozen river, spoken with a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of the earth. Witness the forgotten. Thomas's radio crackled to life, even though it was switched off. A voice came through, distorted and broken. Mayday, Mayday. This is Unit 419. We've gone through the ice. Position unknown. Water is... God, it's so cold. Anyone hearing this, please? The transmission cut off. Thomas grabbed his microphone. Unit 419. This is Thomas Brennan. I copy your Mayday. What's your location? Another voice answered, different from the first. Help us. The ice took our boat. We can't get out. The current is pulling us under. Then another. 1954, November. Our whole convoy went through. All 6 trucks. I can see them sinking below me. And another. Trading party. We were crossing to the other side. The ice was supposed to be safe. They promised it was safe. The voices overlapped and multiplied. A chorus of the dead, all of them calling out their final moments before the ice claimed them. Thomas realized he was hearing every drowning, every tragedy, every life lost beneath the ice of the Mackenzie River, all of them speaking at once through his radio, through the singing ice, through the very air around him. Stop, Thomas said. Please stop. The voices fell silent. The singing resumed, but gentler now, almost mournful. And Thomas understood. The ice wasn't trying to terrify him. It was trying to be remembered. All those lives lost to the cold water, forgotten by history, unmarked and unmourned. The river remembered them. The ice held their shapes, their voices, their final moments. And now, it wanted a witness, someone to acknowledge that they had existed, that their deaths meant something. Thomas sat in his truck for a long time, listening to the ice sing its song of sorrow and memory. He looked at the shapes beneath the surface and tried to see them not as horrors, but as people who had died, doing exactly what he was doing, trying to cross this treacherous landscape, trying to make a living, trying to get home. I see you, Thomas said quietly. I remember you. The singing shifted into a tone of what Thomas could only describe as gratitude. The shapes beneath the ice seemed to fade, becoming less distinct, as if acknowledging his witness was enough to let them rest. Thomas drove on, completing his delivery to Wrigley without further incident. But the experience changed him. He started researching the history of the Mackenzie River crossing, documenting every recorded drowning, every accident, every tragedy. He compiled lists of names where he could find them, and for the nameless ones, he created markers, simple crosses with the dates and circumstances of their deaths. He placed these markers along the ice road at the locations where people had died, working during his off hours, often in brutal cold. Other drivers thought he was crazy, but Thomas didn't care. He'd been asked to witness, and he would bear testimony. The singing ice never spoke to him again in words, but Thomas swears he can still hear it on every run. A low melody that runs beneath the sound of his engine, the crunch of his tires, the whistle of wind. It's the voice of the river, speaking on behalf of those it holds. And sometimes, on the clearest nights, when the temperature drops and the ice forms its perfect crystalline structure, Thomas hears other drivers report the same phenomenon. The singing ice, the lake voice, the melody that emerges from the frozen depths. They ask him what it means, what they should do. Thomas tells them all the same thing. Listen, remember, bear witness. The dead aren't gone as long as someone remembers they existed. He still drives the Mackenzie River ice road every winter. He's 55 now, and he knows he'll probably die out here eventually. Most ice road drivers do, one way or another. But when that day comes, Thomas isn't afraid. He knows the ice will hold him too, will remember him, will sing his story to whoever comes after. The ice speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves. And Thomas Brennan has become its translator, its witness, its voice. A living bridge between the frozen dead and the world that has forgotten them. Story 6. The Mirror Route. Yuki Tanaka never expected to end up driving ice roads in northern Finland, but life has a way of leading people to unexpected places. At 29, she'd left her comfortable IT job in Tokyo because she felt trapped by routine, seeking adventure and purpose. A working holiday visa brought her to Europe, and a chance conversation with a driver at a truck stop led to a job hauling cargo along Finland's northern highways during the brutal winter months. By January 2023, Yuki had been driving for 6 months and had grown to love the work. The isolation suited her temperament, and the stark beauty of the Arctic landscape filled something inside her that Tokyo's neon and concrete had left empty. She specialized in overnight runs between Rovaniemi and the remote communities near the Russian border, routes that most drivers avoided due to the combination of difficult terrain and extreme cold. The incident occurred on January 16th during a run to Ivalo, a small town about 270 kilometers north of Rovaniemi. Yuki was hauling medical supplies and mail, time-sensitive cargo that meant she couldn't delay her departure, despite weather forecasts calling for heavy snow. She left at 10 p.m., planning to arrive by dawn. The first 2 hours were unremarkable. Yuki had driven this route a dozen times and knew it well. The highway followed the Ivalo River for much of the distance, winding through dense pine forests and across frozen lakes. Traffic was non-existent at this hour, and Yuki drove in the comfortable solitude she'd come to treasure. Around midnight, as she passed through a section of forest particularly thick with snow-laden trees, Yuki noticed something strange. Her GPS, which had been functioning perfectly, suddenly showed her position as being in 2 places simultaneously. The blue dot representing her truck appeared both on her expected route and on what looked like a parallel road running about 2 kilometers to the east. She'd never seen the GPS glitch like this before. Yuki tapped the screen, trying to reset it, but the dual positions remained. And as she watched, the second position began moving, tracking along the parallel road at exactly the same speed she was driving. It was as if there were 2 versions of her truck, traveling separate but identical routes simultaneously. She tried to call her dispatcher using the satellite phone, but couldn't get a connection. Not unusual in this area, but the timing felt wrong. Yuki's instincts, honed by months of solo driving in dangerous conditions, were telling her something wasn't right. Then she saw the lights. Off to her right, through the trees, Yuki could see headlights. Another truck, running parallel to her own, matching her speed exactly. She was certain there was no road in that direction. Her maps showed only unbroken forest. But the lights were unmistakable, and they stayed perfectly aligned with her position as both vehicles traveled north. Yuki slowed down experimentally. The lights slowed down. She sped up. They sped up. She stopped completely, and the lights stopped too, maintaining their position 2 kilometers to the east. This had to be some kind of optical illusion, Yuki told herself. Maybe moonlight reflecting off ice, or another driver on a logging road she didn't know about. But her GPS still showed 2 positions, and now both were stationary. Waiting, Yuki picked up her CB radio and switched through frequencies, trying to raise the other driver. On channel 19, she heard something that made her skin prickle. Her own voice, speaking Japanese, saying the exact words she was about to speak. "This is truck 427 on the Ivalo Highway, calling the northbound truck to my east. Do you copy?" She dropped the microphone like it had shocked her. That wasn't an echo. That was her voice, speaking simultaneously with her, not a fraction of a second delayed. Yuki picked up the microphone again, her hand shaking. "Who are you?" she asked in English this time, trying to prove this wasn't just some weird transmission loop. "Who are you?" came the response immediately, also in English, also in her voice. Yuki's chest felt tight. This wasn't possible. She looked at the lights through the trees, and a terrible suspicion began forming in her mind. She turned off her headlights, plunging her truck into darkness except for the glow from her instrument panel. 2 kilometers away, the other lights also went dark. Yuki turned her headlights back on. The other lights came on. She was looking at herself. Another version of herself, driving an identical truck on an identical route, responding to everything she did with perfect synchronization. A mirror route. The rational part of Yuki's mind scrambled for explanations. Hallucination from carbon monoxide. But her detector showed normal levels, sleep deprivation. But she felt wide awake. Some kind of elaborate prank involving radio transmitters and remote-controlled lights. But who would do that, and why? Her GPS flickered again, and now it showed not 2 positions, but multiple positions, 4, then 6, then more, spreading out in a pattern like ripples from a stone dropped in water. Each position showed a truck identifier. 427A, 427B, 427C, continuing into double digits. Yuki heard her CB radio activate on its own, and a chorus of voices came through. All her voice, all speaking Japanese, but saying different things. Been driving for 3 days, can't find the way back. The road just keeps splitting. Every choice creates another version. Delivered my cargo, but the recipient didn't exist. Nobody at the address. Building was empty. Saw myself at the truck stop. She looked at me and drove away. We're all fragments now. Yuki grabbed the radio. "Stop! What's happening? How do I make this stop?" One voice answered, clearer than the others. "You chose the route that splits. January 16th, kilometer 145. There's a fork in reality. Most drivers never notice it. They take one path and never know the other exists. But you saw it. You acknowledged it. And now, you exist in all the paths simultaneously." "That's insane," Yuki said. "Reality doesn't work that way." "It doesn't work that way in Tokyo," the voice agreed. "But you're not in Tokyo. You're in the far north, where the sun disappears for weeks, where the Earth's magnetic field does strange things, where reality gets thin. The ice roads don't follow normal rules." Yuki looked at her GPS. The multiple positions were still spreading, creating a web of possible routes across the map. She realized that each one represented a choice she could make. Different speeds, different stops, different paths through the night. And each choice would create another version of herself. Another truck 427. Another Yuki Tanaka living a slightly different version of this same journey. "How do I undo this?" she asked. "How do I collapse back into one version?" "You can't," multiple voices answered in unison. "Once you've split, you stay split. All the versions exist simultaneously. But most of them will never reach their destination. They'll drive forever, trapped in loops, or they'll simply fade as their reality becomes too divergent from the prime timeline. Then what do? You choose which version you want to be. The version that knows about the split, or the version that never noticed. The version that delivered her cargo, or the version that's still driving. The version that goes home to Tokyo, or the version that stays lost in the north. Choose and commit to that choice completely. Believe in it hard enough, and it becomes real. Yuki looked at the lights through the trees. She thought about quantum mechanics, about the many worlds interpretation, about Schrödinger's cat existing in multiple states until observed. She thought about her GPS, showing impossible positions, about her own voice speaking to her through the radio, about the fundamental strangeness of the universe. And she made a choice. Yuki chose to be the version that delivers her cargo, completes her route, and returns safely to Rovaniemi. She chose to be the version that experiences this weirdness, but doesn't let it trap her. She chose to be real, singular, whole. She put her truck in gear and drove forward, ignoring the lights in the trees, ignoring the voices on the radio, ignoring her GPS with its proliferating positions. She focused on the physical reality in front of her. The snow on the road, the trees sliding past her windows, the weight of the steering wheel in her hands, the rumble of the engine. The lights in the trees faded. The voices on the radio went silent. Her GPS flickered one final time, then showed a single position. Truck 427 on the Ivalo highway, exactly where she should be. Yuki delivered her cargo to Ivalo at 6:47 a.m., only 17 minutes behind schedule. The delay was attributed to heavy snow. She returned to Rovaniemi later that day and filed a routine trip report that mentioned nothing unusual. But Yuki knows the truth. She knows that somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, other versions of herself are still driving. Some made it to Ivalo. Some are still on the road, trapped in loops. Some turned back. Some drove into the trees chasing the mysterious lights. All of those versions exist, and Yuki exists here, in this timeline, only because she chose to. She continued driving ice roads for another year before returning to Japan. She never told anyone about the mirror route, about the moment when reality split, and she had to choose which version of herself to be. But the experience changed her understanding of existence fundamentally. Yuki knows now that we're all navigating branching paths constantly, creating and discarding alternate versions of ourselves with every decision. Most people never see the other paths, never hear the other versions. But the ice roads showed her the truth. Reality is thinner than we think, and the borders between possible worlds are negotiable. She's back in Tokyo now, working IT again. But sometimes Yuki dreams she's still driving through the Finnish night. In those dreams, she passes a truck going the opposite direction, and the driver is herself, and they lock eyes for just a moment. The other Yuki looks tired and lost, like she's been driving forever and has forgotten where she was trying to go. And the waking Yuki is grateful for the choice she made. Grateful to be the version that came home, grateful to be singular and real. But she also carries a strange guilt, knowing that other versions of herself are still out there, still driving, still trapped on the mirror route that splits reality into infinite paths. The ice roads remember all the choices we make and all the choices we don't. And somewhere in the quantum north, every version of every driver exists simultaneously, navigating roads that branch endlessly through probability space, each one real to themselves, each one convinced they're the only one. Yuki Tanaka exists here, in Tokyo, in this timeline. But part of her is still driving through the Finnish winter, and will be forever. Story 7. The Delivery to Nowhere. Mikhail Volkov had delivered cargo to some strange places during his 15 years, driving Russia's winter roads. But nothing in his experience prepared him for the coordinates he received on March 10th, 2021. The job came through an intermediary, a logistics broker in Norilsk, who specialized in connecting drivers with remote mining and research operations. The pay was exceptional, triple the normal rate for a single delivery run. The cargo was light but classified as sensitive. Electronic equipment, the broker said, for a meteorological research station. What made the job unusual was the destination. The coordinates didn't correspond to any known settlement, facility, or landmark. When Mikhail plotted them on his map, they placed the delivery point approximately 200 kilometers northeast of Dudinka, in the middle of the Taimyr Peninsula. There was nothing there but tundra and permafrost, one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth. Mikhail contacted the broker for clarification. These coordinates, they're in the middle of nowhere. You're sure they're correct? Confirmed, the broker said. The facility is new. Very specialized research. They don't publicize the location for security reasons. But they need this equipment, and they're willing to pay well for discretion and reliability. The money was good enough to overcome Mikhail's skepticism. He loaded the cargo, 3 large crates, properly secured and labeled only with tracking numbers, and departed Dudinka on the morning of March 11th. The weather forecast was acceptable, cold but clear, with temperatures around -38°C. His route would take him along rough winter tracks used occasionally by mining prospectors, eventually leaving even those primitive roads behind to cross open tundra. The first day of travel was tedious but uneventful. Mikhail covered about 120 kilometers, stopping to rest in his sleeper cab rather than risk camping outside in the extreme cold. His GPS showed him approaching the coordinates, with an estimated arrival time of mid-afternoon the following day. Day 2 started badly. Mikhail woke to find a thin layer of frost on the inside of his windows, despite his heater running all night. The temperature had dropped to -45, and his engine turned over reluctantly. He let it warm up for 30 minutes before attempting to move, standard procedure in these conditions. By noon, he'd left behind even the faintest traces of trails. He was navigating purely by GPS now, driving across flat, featureless tundra, broken occasionally by clusters of rocks or shallow depressions. The landscape was so uniform that Mikhail felt like he was driving across an infinite white plain, making no progress despite his speedometer showing steady movement. His GPS indicated he was within 50 kilometers of the destination when he saw the structure. It appeared suddenly on the horizon, materializing as if it had been invisible until he reached some critical distance. At first, Mikhail thought it was a natural rock formation, but as he drew closer, he realized it was unmistakably man-made. A complex of low buildings, constructed from gray concrete, designed to minimize wind resistance. There were no lights, no signs of activity, no vehicles parked outside. Mikhail checked his GPS. The coordinates matched. This was his destination. He pulled up to what appeared to be the main building and killed his engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no birds, no sound whatsoever. Mikhail climbed down from his cab, his boots crunching in the snow, and approached the nearest door. It was unlocked. Mikhail pushed it open and called out in Russian, "Delivery for meteorological research station. Anyone here?" His voice echoed in empty corridors. Mikhail entered cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through darkness. The interior was clinical and cold, with concrete walls and metal doors leading to various rooms. Everything looked new, but completely unused. No equipment in the laboratories he passed, no furniture in what appeared to be living quarters, no personal effects anywhere. One room contained what looked like a communications center, but all the equipment racks were empty. Another held a generator that had never been fueled. The facility was a shell, built but never occupied, never used, never activated. Mikhail felt profound unease. This wasn't a functioning research station. It was a prop, a facade, a structure that existed for no apparent purpose. And he'd just driven 200 kilometers across hostile terrain to deliver equipment to a place that clearly didn't need it and had no staff to receive it. He returned to his truck and grabbed his satellite phone. The screen showed full signal strength, but couldn't establish a connection when he tried to call the broker. He tried multiple times with the same result. The phone reported that the network was available, but his calls simply wouldn't complete. Mikhail was considering his options when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The sun was setting, dropping toward the horizon as it should in mid-March at this latitude. But it was setting in the north. The sun was moving in the wrong direction. He pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on any direction. He checked his GPS. It showed his position accurately, but also displayed a message he'd never seen before. Warning: local gravitational anomaly detected. Positioning may be inaccurate. Gravitational anomaly? Mikhail had never heard of such a thing affecting GPS systems. He looked around at the landscape, seeing it with new eyes. The snow didn't drift naturally. It formed patterns that looked almost geometric. The rocks were placed too regularly, like markers or boundary stones. And the facility itself, now that he studied it more carefully, didn't cast a shadow, despite the low-angle sunlight. This place was wrong. Fundamentally, physically wrong. Mikhail made a decision. He was leaving the cargo and getting out of here. He'd drive back to Dudinka, tell the broker the delivery was completed, and collect his payment. He didn't care if anyone was here to receive the equipment or not. That wasn't his problem. He began offloading the crates, stacking them near the facility's main entrance. As he moved the second crate, he heard a sound from inside the building, a low hum, like machinery starting up. He stopped and listened. The hum grew louder, and lights began flickering on in the facility's windows. A door opened, and a figure emerged, man-shaped but not quite right, moving stiffly, wearing a heavy coat that covered all distinguishing features. The figure approached Mikhail and spoke in a flat, mechanical voice. "Cargo received. Confirm delivery." Mikhail's heart was racing. "Yes, confirmed. 3 crates as specified. Where do you want me to sign?" The figure didn't respond to his question. It simply repeated, "Cargo received. Confirm delivery." "I just did," Mikhail said. "Look, I need a signature or some proof that I made this delivery. My company requires documentation." The figure tilted its head at an angle that would have been painful for a human. "Proof unnecessary. Delivery complete. Compensation transferred. Departure authorized." Mikhail pulled out his phone to check his account. To his shock, his balance showed the contracted amount had indeed been deposited. But his banking app showed the transaction time as occurring 3 hours in the future. That wasn't possible. Electronic banking transfers were time-stamped with atomic clock precision. "I'm leaving now," Mikhail said, backing toward his truck. The figure made no move to stop him. It simply stood there, watching with whatever sensors were hidden beneath its hood. As Mikhail climbed into his cab, he heard the figure speak one final time. Delivery driver Mikhail Volkov. Contract fulfilled. Memory adjustment recommended. Do you consent? Memory adjustment? What are you talking about? This facility does not exist. This delivery did not occur. Memories of this location are not compatible with standard reality parameters. Adjustment ensures integration. Do you consent? Mikhail started his engine. I don't consent to anything. I'm leaving. Noted. Departure authorized. Safe journey, Mikhail Volkov. We will not meet again. Mikhail drove away from the facility as fast as his truck could safely manage. He navigated by compass, or tried to, until the needle finally stopped spinning and pointed properly north again. He drove through the night, desperate to put distance between himself and that wrong place, where the sun set in the north and buildings cast no shadows. He reached Dudinka 36 hours later, exhausted and shaken. The broker confirmed receiving notification of successful delivery and thanked Mikhail for his professionalism. When Mikhail tried to ask questions about the facility and the figure that had accepted the cargo, the broker claimed ignorance. He was just a middleman, he said, connecting clients with drivers. He knew nothing about the actual operations. Mikhail returned home to Norilsk. The money from the job was real and safely in his account. But when he tried to show his friends the GPS track from his journey, he found that the data had been corrupted. The log showed him leaving Dudinka, then a gap, then arriving back in Dudinka 3 days later. The entire trip to the coordinates, the facility, everything, erased from his GPS history as if it had never happened. He tried to locate the coordinates again on his map. He was certain he remembered them, but no matter how many times he checked, he couldn't find the same position twice. The numbers slipped from his memory like water, and each time he looked them up in his records, they were slightly different. Mikhail drives still, taking jobs across Russia's winter roads. But he avoids brokers now, sticking to direct contracts with companies he knows. And he never accepts jobs that pay too well or deliver to coordinates instead of addresses. Because Mikhail knows the truth, even if the evidence has been erased. There are places that exist outside normal reality, locations that can be reached but can't be found again, facilities that serve purposes beyond human understanding. The ice roads don't just connect settlements. Sometimes they connect to nowhere, to places that occupy the gaps between real locations, to installations that exist only when they're needed and vanish when they're done. The figure told him they wouldn't meet again, and Mikhail believes that. But sometimes, when he's driving through the most remote sections of the Taimyr Peninsula, he sees lights in the distance that don't correspond to any settlement on his maps. And sometimes his GPS warns him about gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist. Mikhail drives past those lights. He ignores those warnings, and he tells himself that the delivery to nowhere was just a strange dream, a hallucination brought on by cold and isolation and exhaustion. He tells himself that and almost believes it. But the money in his account is real. The time gap in his GPS log is real. And deep in his memory, getting fainter with each passing year, but never quite disappearing, is the image of a figure standing in the snow, tilting its head at an inhuman angle, speaking in a mechanical voice about memory adjustments and reality parameters. The ice roads go to places you can find on maps, but they also go to places you can't, places that exist in the margins of geography, places that serve as delivery points for cargo that shouldn't exist, for operations that can't be explained, for purposes that humanity wasn't meant to understand. Mikhail Volkov made one delivery to nowhere, and it paid him enough that he'll never have to make another. But the cost was knowing, truly knowing, that the world contains places his mind wasn't designed to process, and that somewhere on the frozen wastes of the Taimyr Peninsula, there's a facility that exists and doesn't exist simultaneously, waiting for its next delivery, staffed by figures that aren't quite human, serving purposes that defy rational explanation. He doesn't talk about it anymore, but he remembers. And remembering is sometimes the heaviest cargo of all.